When Sarge Wells come, I wondered how he come there, but apparently they were a travelling sideshow before the war. He come down the Harbour Road, the whole retinue, but the war started. So Sarge stayed on there. But he went up that side. That was originally Johnson's, that, you know. Do you remember Sarge Wells, Michael?
No, not really.
Well, the sheds were up there. But that was Johnson's coal yard and garage up there. So it was. It would have been Harry's dad. Had that there. But Sarge was on there. So you run up. On Saturday, the trips here were unbelievable. When there was hundreds of folk everywhere. So you're up like a shot to Sarge. Because everything was hand pushed. The hobby horses, the swing boats, the over boats, and you got a job. You never paid you, but what you did, you had to slip a couple of pennies. You had a hole in your pocket, and you slipped in it and down the side, and you collected that money. And she's dead now, but she was at the show one night, and I said, there was this lass there, she had a skirt on, but she pulled it up, and she had them wee navy blue knickers on. And I said, there was a wee pocket on them. I says, why would you have a wee pocket in your knickers? And she said, and she used to put a threepenny bit in there and say, he'll no put his hands in there. The same boy would have put his hand on it, but it knew. But we were there every Saturday, making 2 or 3 shilling. It was great all together. Between that and gathering bottles of the shore, lemonade, you got a penny for a lemonade bottle and a penny for a porter bottle. It's the only way you were ever getting any money. But we come along to the Sandfield football match Saturday night, and a crowd of boys outside Sarge's. Boys says, come on up, Sarge has got a dummy here, and the midgets boxing away, and that was Ivan McCready. And he says, he's punching this dummy. So Davy Adair and me and Elliot McCready and coming up. Davy says, boy, square and real, looking by his fingernails. He says, holy God, it's Sarge. He'd hung himself, and Ivan was standing punching the hell out of him in the road. And but that was it. But that was the thing I was thinking on. Folks said, who ever come for Ballywalter? But you think back, you had 2 of the best looking lasses in the country here that won the competitions. You had Elizabeth Johnson, Valerie Lemon, Roy Reid, Ulster Road Racing champion in the motorbikes. Ivan McCready went on to be an amateur champion. He fought for the British title. The band, we had 1 world champions. I think there was plenty in the village for us to go to. I remember trying to learn the flute, and I couldn't even learn that. Jackie just gave me the big drumstick. He says, you can keep time. That was the only thing I was good at. And my fingers were too big. I was covering 2 holes with one finger. It was no use for Jackie at all. But he was brilliant. Jackie didn't know, you know. But that was one thing. I was talking about the school there. I was giving a talk one night to the... what do we call them? The Women's Guild or something like that there in the Masonic Hall. And I was talking about the school like I did before, and wee Evelyn Hamilton come over to me. She says, I'm surprised to hear you talking about like that about Bob Lindsay. I said, Evelyn, I never said anything wrong about Bob Lindsay. He was a good teacher, but he was too fond of the cane. When she says, I introduced your mother to him. And he said, are you Willie's mother? And you know what he said to your mother? So I'm sure it was good. He said, you had the highest IQ of any pupil he ever taught. And I said, it's a terrible pity he never told me. I didn't know what an IQ was anyway. It made no odds for it. But my IQ got me to be a policeman in Liverpool. And when I decided to join the police, I had to get references. So the man that I had worked for was Sandy McCready. Now, Sandy, no disrespect to the man, he was semi-illiterate. Wasn't he totally illiterate, but, you know, reading and writing wouldn't have been his... But I said to an inspector across there later on in it, he's talked about the men you'd worked for. I said, for me, the best man I ever worked for was a big man called Sandy McCready. He says, why? I says, because he worked alongside you. And if he saw somebody in the group getting tired, he took over for them. And I said, he worked harder than you ever worked, and you had to work to keep up with him. But anyway, I got up the street, and I had put Sandy's name down to give me a reference. And he never referred to me as anything else, only Cromie. And I'm down the street, and I heard, Cromie! And I went over, I says, hey, what? What's that there? And this was this big letter for the Liverpool police for a reference for me. He says, what do you do? I says, don't you worry, Sandy, you leave that to me. So I wrote the reference, and I get Sandy signed it. That's some reference. I've become a sergeant in Liverpool. But you met some folk there. I was standing I was on duty in a football match. I can still see it yet. It was Everton at home to Manchester United. And the way they worked then, there was one policeman per 1,000 spectators, but there was only a handful walked around the pitch when the match was on. But before the match and half time and then the whole crowd went out. And I'm walking around, and the way you can feel somebody looking at you, this crowd. And I looked up, and there was Fred McAdam and Jim. And he was a wee fella. And he comes down to me and he says, what are you doing here? I says, what does it look like? Fred. And he burst out laughing. And I brought them down to the end of the match. I got them introduced to some of the players in there. And about years and years later, it would have been near 30 years later, the Grey Abbey had a wee historical society there. And Will McAvoy says, there's a boy coming down here. He's trying to get trees to grow on the Falkland Islands. I says, do you want me to listen to that or what? He says, but I went in, and this wee, very tanned fella, completely bald, he walks up, he says, how are you, Willie? I says, here are you. He says, I'm Jim McAdam. And he still remembered me, even for them days. But and when I got on duty, I was sitting in this out of dock shed, and the sergeant came in, it was on nights, and he says, away for a walk around there, the fresh air, see if you've fallen asleep in here. So I downed around to come back. He says, where were you? I says, oh, you sent me for a walk. Where do you think I was? What's wrong? He says, there's a boy here looking for you. I said, what do you call him? He says, I don't know. But I says, could you do ask him his name? You're a sergeant. No, but he says he left a parcel. I says, a man come in from Northern Ireland, talked like me, and he left a parcel. And you took the parcel off him. I don't believe this boy. It was just happened to top. So I opened it up, and as soon as I opened it up, I knew what it was. The boy that brought it over was Ronnie Birch. And Ronnie had been in with my ma and sent me a box of soda farls and waiting for it. Well, I lifted this soda farl out, and the sergeant says, what are you going to do with asbestos? So I got a pan. I says, you wait till this. We hot it up. I got the pan out and the eggs and the bacon and fried this. They were done every day. Look, every night he was on. Is that boy up with that boat again? And then another day, same thing, I was walking down. Big shout of the boat with the inspector along with me. Looked over, Bobby Dempster. And Bobby was the ship's cook. And he's standing in his whites. And of course, he's blathering to me in Ballywalter, and that was great. Him and me's yarning away, and this sergeant, our inspector, he says, stop a minute. Say what language is that you two? He says, you've been in this job 3 years. And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I says, look, I'll tell you what it is. See that big man there? He says, yeah. I says, he's the ship's cook. And he has invited us on board for breakfast. But I said, you're the inspector. If you're saying, what? He says, come on. So Bobby came up with these 2 fries, and just a mountain on the plate, and he sat in front. I says to the inspector, take it easy, boy, now that's just the starter. You hear the main meal. That's what you've been quicker running and running, or jumping everything and running and running. But I used to meet a lot of the boys in the boats there. Jim Fullerton of Ballyhilbert was a great mate of mine at the finish, because I would have been down with my suit and a case and old denims on and walked on crew. And went down with Fullerton, sat down, put my suit on, and he took me up and saw the stewardess. I said, get that man a cabin. And he had a car in the dock, and he took me home to Ballywalter. But the time the foot and mouth epidemic, I had bad book to come home at this here. And I says, this is great. But the next thing that come up, no, was not. I was foot and mouth epidemic. And there was nothing, and I had booked to go home. And the boy says, no boat's going out of here. And Birch come down by. It was about 2 in the morning. I says, where are you going, boy? He says, to the boat. He says, what are you for? He says, we're sailing. I says, where are you sailing to? To Belfast. I says, right, I'll be on the boat. Oh, he says, you can't get on it. Well, I says, it's like this. If I didn't get on the boat, there's no sailing. so I got on the boat, and that was me away. And the first time I got into Liverpool. Now, I've never been in Liverpool. When I did the exam, I went across, and I got a medical here. Dr. Macaulay showed him this document. Why you join the police? I said, I want to join the police. I had to get a medical of you. Right, he put a bit of, what colour's that? I tell him. Many fingers am I holding up? And something else. Right, that's dead on. He has my medical. That's all. I got into the police with this medical. And he didn't know what. Anyway, I did my training, and then I'd never been in Liverpool. When I come home, my dad says to me, "Where were you, boy?" I says, "I was over in Liverpool." He says, "We at the match." And I says, "Joined the police." He says, "You what?" I said, "Joined the police." He see his face. But anyway, I'm walking down the street the first day. I got this note to go to this Westminster Road. You go to the dock section, such and such a place. No idea where this was. I thought, I'll get on a bus, somebody will tell me. But then down in front of me, I seen this boy in a navy uniform, and I was down near the dock front then. Oh, I says, "This boy, I'll know who." And I tapped him, and he turned around. It was Tony Dunkowski, and he was lost. Two of us from Billy Walter standing in the middle of Liverpool, but then knew where we were. But I had a good old life in that there, but I met some wonderful characters. I actually met Freddie Starr down there in a pub. Stella Black went into their club one night, and she was Stella White then. They hadn't changed her name. Folk like that there. And the best one I ever had, I went to this club. It was a super place, the Shakespeare Theatre Club. It's an old music hall, and the stalls were on it, and there was boxes and all this here. And there was a stage, but the floor went down and hoisting up again. And the boy knew that my mate and me were in the police, and he liked you coming in because if there was any bother, he could call on us, you know. But we went in, and he came out with this broken English. He says, "You're an Irishman." I said, "We're near enough, aye, why?" He says, "We have Irishman, top of bill." I says, "How you?" He says, "I bring him to you." Who did he bring out? Joseph Locke. And he came over to me. He says, "What are you doing here?" I says, "The same as you." "What do you mean?" I says, "I joined the police and then I'm going to be a singer." Because he used to be in the RIC in Derry. I said, "I joined the police and I'm going to be a singer." But this show band come on, the Royal, the ones that shot, they were unbelievable. These Liverpool fellas didn't know anything about this. I says, "What do you hear these crowd?" Well, this thing was sunk on the floor, and then it come up, and this band going full tilt, and they thought it was great. And I said to the boys, talk to them, "Where are you going later?" He said, "We're going up to the Irish Club." I says, "Well, you get us in." I said, "No, we're all on the police." There were 6 of us. I says, "We're on the police." "Oh, come on ahead." So we went up and dancing, banging away about the flare. And then everybody else was standing still except these 5 Liverpool boys, and I pulled the boys away. I said, "See that tune there?" He says, I says, "That's the Irish national anthem." They were dancing, hooping around the flare. Lucky enough, a couple of them knew who we were, you know, and we got away with it. But the first case they gave me, I come in. The very man, he says, "Get your first case in the book." Say, "What is it?" "Domestic dispute." Say, "What's that mean?" He says, "There's a big journal there, page in it. 2 sets of neighbours have fallen out up that street there. You go and get the first couple's name and address, have a wee talk to them, go on to get the second couple's name and address, find a wee bit what happened, then come down and just fill the book in with names and just put it, advice given." It's just dead on. Up I goes, all prim and proper and fully booted and spurred, a hat, wee naughty hat on, and a big photograph of the Queen above the mantelpiece, and talked away for a while. And then I went to the next door. What was above the mantelpiece? A big portrait of the Pope. Well, I said, what are you at, boy? I said, "I've been fighting over that for 300 years in Ballywalder. You want me to sort it out the next in the year?" But the one that always reminded me of a film, Jaws. Every time across it, it's no like it now, across there, when an ambulance was sent, there had to be a police officer sent, or a police car, to see just what had happened. And we got round to this to see, in case there was somebody knifing or anything at all. And it was this fairly obese woman had sat down, and a big delf goes under, and it shattered. And it was like that there, and it was pressed on her backside. And she was sitting in this. You know what? I don't know, I was listening to they were me. But that's what it happened. She sat in this big den, and it shattered when she sat on it. Desperate. But there were it was good times, there was bad times. But I enjoyed it. What was there in there 4.5 years. I enjoyed it immensely with different characters. especially when you went to Anderson. He was Wenty still about yet?
Oh, yeah.
I was on duty on the docks. Wenty was renowned for getting full and wrecking places. And he come staggering up the dock, and I stepped out. I says, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going to that bar and I'm going to wreck it." I says, "You know what? You're going back on your boat." He says, "You going to put me?" "No," I says, "but there's 5 boys outside that gate that'll come in here with the same uniform, and we'll put you on board the boat, right or wrong, whatever you say." He just turned around and walked back to the boat. he didn't wreck the place. But there's all sorts of things you'd have got there. The seamen coming ashore, they had everything under the sun. And they talk about racketeering. The police were the biggest racketeers in the business. you had to know what you were at. But I'll tell you another, I'm going to talk about death at a time. It was a boy coming to me outside Walton Hospital. And he says, "Excuse me, officer, that door's shut and there's blood running under it." I said, "That's not." No. So we broke the door open, and this boy was over the pot with a razor blade, and he'd cut his throat. Oh, jeez. I said, so we got him down for the hospital, and we got him up, and he lived. He had to get 5 pints of blood put on him, but he lived. And I went to see the surgeon or whatever that looked after him, and I says, "What? I need to know what he used." And he handed me a razor blade, and there was a bit of paper on it. He says, "Do you know what that's for?" I know. He says, "They always wrap the razor blade in paper before they cut themselves, in case they cut their finger." And that's true. He wrapped it in a bit of razor blade, a bit of paper, in case he cut his finger and he suddenly cut his throat.